I never thought I'd be the kind of man to tell a story like this. The kind of story where the people you trust the most, the ones you take a bullet for, are the very same people who put the knife in your back. But here I am. And if you're listening to this, then you're about to hear how betrayal can turn a man into something else entirely, into someone you never want to cross. For years, I thought I had it all. The American dream wrapped up with a neat little bow. A business I built from the ground up. Friends I'd known since college, the type of guys you share cheap beers with at a.m., swearing you'll always have each other's backs. And of course, a wife I adored. I worked myself into the ground for her, gave her the kind of life most people would envy. The big house, the vacations, the cars. She didn't need to worry about a single thing. All she had to do was love me back. At least, that's what I thought. It all started unraveling one morning. A normal morning. Coffee waiting on the table. My wife supposedly out on her morning run. The kind of small ritual that makes life feel stable. But when I walked into my home office, something was off. A few documents from my safe were gone. Not random papers, important ones. Ownership records, investor contracts, banking agreements. My first thought was that I had misplaced them. But then my gut started screaming at me. This wasn't a mistake. I called my business partner. No answer. I called another one of the guys. Straight to voicemail. Then my phone buzzed. A single text message that changed everything. It's over. We own everything now. Remember staring at those words, reading them again and again, hands shaking. My mind didn't want to believe it, but deep down I knew the truth. This wasn't just bad luck. This wasn't some clerical error. This was betrayal. By the time I got to the bank, it was already too late. My accounts were frozen. My lawyer confirmed my worst fear. Forged signatures, manipulated contracts on paper. I no longer owned what I had built with my blood and sweat. My so-called friends had taken it all. Overnight, I had gone from being a man with a future to a man stripped of everything. But the cruelest cut wasn't from them. It was waiting for me at home. I rushed back to my house, desperate to find my wife, to at least feel her arms around me while my world collapsed. But the house was empty. Her clothes were gone, drawers half open, jewelry missing. On the kitchen counter was a single folded note. I opened it with trembling fingers, and I swear, I can still hear her voice every time I remember those words. I can't do this anymore. You'll never be the man I wanted you to be. Don't come looking for me. Just like that, she was gone. Not only had my friend stolen everything I built, she had been part of it. The woman I loved, the one I trusted more than anyone, had been lying to me the whole time. And in that moment, standing alone in my silent house with that note in my hand, I made myself a promise. They thought they had destroyed me, but what they didn't realize is that I was just getting started. When people talk about losing everything, they don't usually mean it literally. But I did. My friends stole my company. My wife ran off. My accounts were drained. My home, the house I thought would be the foundation of my future, was gone within weeks. Foreclosure papers nailed to the door like a death sentence. I went from suits and boardrooms to sleeping in the back of my car, from expensive dinners to digging through dollar menus, counting quarters and dimes. People who used to shake my hand with respect now looked at me with pity, or worse, with contempt. In the city where I once commanded meetings and made deals, I was invisible. Just another failure who had burned too bright, too fast. But here's the thing about losing everything. It strips you down to your core. And when you've got nothing left, no safety net, no illusions, you finally see the world for what it really is. Nights were the hardest. I'd park in the shadow of some gas station, lean back against the worn leather seat, and stare at the ceiling of my car, wondering how the hell it all happened so fast. Anger would hit first, burning hot in my chest. Then shame, crippling, suffocating. And finally, emptiness. The kind of silence that eats at you from the inside. Sometimes, I thought about ending it. It would have been easy. One quick decision, and all that pain would disappear. But every time I got close, every time the thought became almost too tempting, something inside me stopped me. A voice whispering, "Not yet. Not like this. See, there's a strange kind of freedom in losing it all. You realize there's nothing else they can take from you. You're already standing in the ashes of your old life. And from ashes, something new can be built. Something stronger, something dangerous. One night, as I sat in my car with an empty fast food bag beside me, I saw a newspaper headline through the glass of a convenience store. Local entrepreneurs celebrate record profits. And there they were, my so-called friends, smiling for the cameras, holding champagne flutes, wearing the suits I paid for. It was like a switch flipped inside me. The shame burned away. The hopelessness turned into fuel. And I realized I wasn't finished, not by a long shot. They thought they had buried me. But what they didn't understand is that I was still alive. And a man with nothing left to lose? He's the most dangerous man of all. That night, I made a silent vow. I wouldn't just survive. I would rise again. And when I did, I would make sure they felt everything I felt. Every ounce of betrayal, every drop of pain, every sleepless night. They took everything from me. But now, if it was my turn. People always say hindsight is 20/20. Looking back, the signs were there. Little cracks in the foundation of my so-called perfect life. Whispers I ignored because I didn't want to face the truth. But when you're blinded by trust, you don't notice the shadows creeping in until it's too late. After the collapse, after the house, the car, the business, all of it was gone. Found myself replaying old conversations in my head. Things that once seemed harmless suddenly sounded calculated. My business partner, Mark, pushing me to sign certain contracts without reading them too closely. Don't worry, man. We're family. Just trust me. My wife, Emily, taking late night calls in the kitchen, her voice low, always quick to hang up when I walked in. The uneasy glances between my friends when money came up. At the time, I brushed it off. I wanted to believe in them. I wanted to believe in us. But now, every memory felt like a knife twisting deeper into my gut. One afternoon, I sat at a public library, my new office, since I didn't have one anymore. I was scrolling through old emails, contracts, bank records on one of their clunky computers. That's when I noticed something I should have caught months earlier. Subtle changes in the wording of agreements I had signed. Clauses that shifted. Ownership percentages, backdated signatures, even entire pages swapped out. It wasn't sloppy work. It was meticulous. They had planned this for a long time. The realization hit me like a freight train. My downfall wasn't some spontaneous act of betrayal, it was a carefully orchestrated campaign. And the worst part, my wife had been helping them. Her signature appeared in some of the paperwork. Listed as a witness, a co-signer. She wasn't just a bystander. She was in on it from the start. I remember sitting there, staring at the glowing computer screen, my fists clenched so tight my knuckles turned white. People around me probably thought I was just another down on his luck guy fighting with the Wi-Fi. But inside, I was a volcano ready to erupt. The anger was overwhelming, but beneath it was something sharper, clarity. If they had been planning this for months, maybe even years, then I had to assume they'd left trails. No plan is perfect. No betrayal is flawless. Somewhere, buried in the details, would be their mistakes. All I had to do was find them. That night, lying in the back seat of my car, I started making lists in a battered notebook. Every odd look, every strange comment, every business deal that had felt rushed or forced. I wrote down names, dates, locations. I wasn't just remembering, I was investigating. For the first time since everything collapsed, I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Control. And that's when the thought took root, deep in my mind, feeding on my anger like fire to gasoline. They thought they were clever. They thought they had won. But what they didn't know was that I was starting to put the pieces together. And when I did, I wasn't going to the police. I wasn't going to court. No, I was going to handle it my way. Disappearing is easier than most people think. One day, you just stop answering calls. You stop showing up where people expect you. You fade into the background. In a city like mine, with millions of faces rushing past each other every day, becoming invisible isn't difficult, it's survival. That's what I did. I went silent. Mark, my ex-partner, probably thought I'd either left town or crawled into some gutter, too broken to ever fight back. Emily likely convinced herself I was finished, that I'd never dare to look her in the eye again. That's what they wanted, for me to vanish quietly, and for a while, I let them believe that. In truth, I was still here, watching, waiting. I rented a cheap room above a rundown bar, the kind of place nobody asks questions if you pay cash. I worked odd jobs under the table, dishwashing, warehouse shifts, whatever kept food in my stomach. But my real work began after sunset. I learned their schedules. Mark liked to hit the gym early in the mornings, the same overpriced fitness center downtown. My other partner, Jason, had a routine 2 late-night poker games at a private club where he thought no one was watching. And Emily, she was the easiest to track. She had moved into a sleek condo, funded, no doubt, by the money they'd stolen from me. I watched her come and go, laughing with friends, shopping with cards that used to have my name on them. At first, it hurt more than I could handle. Seeing her smile, carefree, as if the years we spent together were nothing more than a stepping stone to something better. My chest would tighten, my throat would burn, but I forced myself to keep watching. Pain turned into fuel, and fuel turned into patience. I started small, following them, memorizing patterns. Which nights they stayed out late, which mornings they woke up sluggish and hungover. I wasn't reckless. I didn't want them to know I was still out there. That was the point. The silence, the waiting, and in that silence, I realized something terrifying and powerful. They weren't untouchable. Not at all. Mark had a mistress. I spotted him slipping into hotels more than once, always with a woman who wasn't his wife. Jason had a gambling problem that went deeper than I'd imagined, debts with the wrong people, shady characters who lingered too long outside the poker club. And Emily was living a double life. The man she had left me for wasn't who she pretended he was. I followed him once, watched him hand off a package in an alley, and saw the kind of look in his eyes that only comes from dealing with criminals. Piece by piece, their perfect little world wasn't looking so perfect anymore. I took notes on everything. Dates, names, photos snapped with the cheap second-hand camera. I built files, just like a detective would. Except I wasn't building a case for the courts. I was building one for myself. Every night, sitting in my dim little room with nothing but a lamp buzzing overhead, I'd spread the evidence across the table and stare at it. This was my new business, my new obsession. I wasn't rushing it. No, I had learned my lesson. They had spent months, maybe years, plotting against me. I could do the same. They thought I was gone, but I was closer than they could imagine, lurking in the silence, watching from the shadows, and when the time was right, I would strike. Revenge is usually a lonely road. I knew that when I first started down this path. It was just me, my anger, and the endless nights of planning. But then something happened I didn't expect. I wasn't the only one they had destroyed. It started with Jason the gambler. One night, I followed him to the poker club. He stumbled out hours later, red-eyed and sweating, looking like a man on the edge of collapse. 2 men were waiting for him in the parking lot, leaning against a black SUV. They weren't friends. Their body language screamed debt collectors. I watched from a distance as they cornered him, shoved him against the car, demanded money he clearly didn't have. That's when it clicked. These weren't just shady deals. Jason was in deep with dangerous people, and if he didn't pay up soon, he'd be in more trouble than even he could gamble his way out of. The thought hit me. If Jason could fall, then maybe others already had. I started digging, quietly, carefully. I struck up conversations in bars, near Mark's office, pretending to be just another down on his luck guy looking for work. It didn't take long before I overheard a story about him screwing over smaller contractors, leaving families bankrupt when deals went south. And then there was Emily's new lover, the one with the shifty eyes and late-night alleyway meetings. After a few weeks of watching him, realized he wasn't just dabbling in crime. He was knee-deep in it. Drugs, illegal shipments, things that, if exposed, would drag Emily down with him. The more I uncovered, the more I realized something important. I wasn't the only one who wanted to see them fall. One evening, sitting at the bar downstairs from my rented room, I overheard 2 men talking. Their voices were low, but I caught the name Mark. My ears sharpened. I leaned in, pretending to nurse my drink. They weren't just talking about him, they were furious. Apparently, Mark had cheated them out of a contract, cost them thousands of dollars, and laughed in their faces when they tried to confront him. For weeks, I thought I was alone in my pain. But right there, in that smoky bar, I realized there were others like me, people who had been burned, people who hated them as much as I did. I didn't approach those men that night. I wasn't reckless, but I made a note of their names, their company. They could be useful. The idea was intoxicating. For so long, I had been fighting this war in my head, imagining myself as a lone soldier taking on an army. But what if I didn't have to fight alone? What if there were others angry, betrayed, desperate who could help me bring them down? The thought lingered as I walked back to my room, the cool night air filling my lungs. I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Possibility. Revenge wasn't just mine anymore. It could be bigger, smarter. I wasn't just watching them now. I was building something, a network, a plan. And I knew sooner or later find the right people to stand beside me. People with the same fire in their hearts. People with nothing left to lose. They thought they had left me broken and alone. But what they didn't know was that their list of enemies was growing. And soon, it wouldn't just be me coming for. Knowledge is power. And if I was going to take them down, I needed more than anger and long nights of watching from the shadows. I needed proof. Solid, undeniable evidence of who they really were. When the masks came off, I became obsessed. Every move they made, every careless word, every hidden deal, I wanted it all documented. I started with Mark, my former best friend, my business partner, the man who had looked me in the eye 1,000 times and said, "We're brothers, you and me." The same man who had signed away my future with a forged signature. Mark thought he was clever, but he was sloppy in ways that only someone watching closely could notice. He met his mistress at the same hotel every Thursday night, room 614. I didn't just follow them in, I learned the staff schedule, the security cameras, the blind spots. One night, while he was distracted upstairs, I managed to slip into the hotel's back office, posing as a delivery guy, and copied the security footage. Hours of Mark walking hand in hand with a woman who wasn't his wife. The footage was grainy, but clear enough to destroy his reputation if it ever saw daylight. Jason was easier. His addictions did half the work for me. I followed him to the poker club, snapping photos of the men he owed money to. One night, he stumbled out, drunk and desperate, and I recorded the whole scene on a cheap audio recorder to loan sharks, threatening to break his legs if he didn't pay up. His voice was shaky, terrified. That recording alone could end him. And Emily, God, Emily. Watching her was the hardest. There were moments I almost let myself believe she was just caught up in all this, that maybe she'd been manipulated. But then I saw her laughing with that man, the criminal she had chosen over me. They were inseparable, partners in every sense of the word. I followed him one night, watched him exchange a duffel bag for a stack of cash in an alley, his eyes darting nervously, as if he knew the law was closing in. I photographed the entire deal. Every angle I could. It wasn't just about exposing them. It was about building leverage, ammunition. If I played this right, I wouldn't just bring them down and make them turn on each other. I kept everything in a worn leather briefcase I found at a thrift store. Inside were manila folders, each labeled with their names, photos, recordings, handwritten notes, maps with red circles and arrows showing where they went, who they met, what time they did it. It looked like something out of a detective's office, and late at night, I'd spread it all out across my tiny table, staring at the pieces of their lives like a puzzle, one that only I could solve. The more evidence I gathered, the more I realized how fragile they really were. On the surface, they looked untouchable, wealthy, successful, happy, but underneath, cracks everywhere, affairs, debts, crimes, secrets, and that was the key. I didn't have to destroy them head on. All I had to do was apply the right amount of pressure to those cracks, and they'd shatter on their own. Every night, before I closed the briefcase, I whispered the same words to myself like a prayer, not yet, but soon. Because revenge isn't about rushing in with fists swinging. Revenge is about patience. precision, and I was almost ready. Patience is a weapon. I'd sharpened mine for months, waiting, collecting, preparing. But every weapon is useless until the moment it's put to use. And the time had finally come for me to take my first strike. I knew I couldn't hit them all at once. That would be reckless, too obvious. No, I had to make it subtle, surgical, something small, but devastating enough to plant seeds of doubt and paranoia. Something that would make them look over their shoulders and wonder if their perfect world was starting to crack. Jason was the weakest link. The gambler. The addict. He was already drowning in debt, and all I had to do was push him under. It started with an envelope. Nothing flashy, nothing traceable. Just a plain white envelope left at his apartment door. Inside was a single photo. Jason, drunk and staggering, pinned against his car by two men with cold eyes and fists clenched. The kind of photo that didn't need a caption, but I added one anyway. In black marker, written across the bottom, debts don't disappear, neither do enemies. I knew he'd spiral the moment he saw it. I imagined him pacing his apartment, chain-smoking cigarettes, wondering who had followed him, who was watching. And I was right. A few nights later, I watched from across the street as Jason stormed out of his apartment, eyes darting nervously. He drove to the poker club, but he didn't stay. He couldn't sit still. He circled the block 3 times before, finally parking, slamming his car door, and storming inside. His paranoia was working faster than I'd hoped. Then came the second strike. An anonymous email sent to his wife. Attached were recordings of his drunken arguments with the loan sharks, his voice trembling, begging for more time. No explanation, no sender, just the raw truth of who he really was. By the next week, Jason's marriage was collapsing. His wife kicked him out, screaming at him in the middle of the street while neighbors peeked through blinds. His debts were still growing, his nights filled with whiskey and desperation. I didn't have to destroy him. He was doing it himself. All I did was light the match, and while Jason burned, I made sure Mark was next in line. One Thursday night, when he was busy with his mistress in room 614, I mailed a USB drive to his wife. No note, no explanation, just security footage of him walking through the hotel lobby, arm in arm with another woman. Week after week, I didn't stick around to see her reaction, but I didn't have to. A few days later, Mark showed up at the gym with a bruised cheek, trying to hide it behind sunglasses. His marriage was cracking, and soon his business would follow. As for Emily, I saved her for last. She deserved to watch the world crumble around her first, to see her allies fall one by one, until she had nothing left but the choices she made. The beauty of the first strike wasn't just in the damage, it was in the silence afterward. They didn't know it was me. They didn't know who to blame, but they knew someone was out there, pulling strings, peeling back the layers of their lies. And paranoia. Paranoia is a poison. It seeps into your bones, eats at your mind, until you can't tell friend from enemy. That was my gift to them. My first move in a game they didn't even realize they were playing, and I had only just begun. Paranoia is like smoke, you don't notice it at first. A faint haze in the air, a trick of the light. But the longer it lingers, the harder it is to breathe. And soon, it fills every corner of your life, choking you from the inside. That's what I gave them. Smoke. Jason was unraveling fast. After the envelope and the recording, he couldn't sleep. He spent his nights in bars, knocking back whiskey like water, jumping at every shadow. I followed him one night, watching from a booth in the corner as he argued with the bartender, swearing someone was after him. He wasn't wrong, but the beauty was, no one believed him. To his friends, he was just another drunk spiraling out of control. To his enemies, he was already prey. And that's when the whispers started. He swore he saw a man following him home. A tall figure, standing across the street, vanishing whenever Jason blinked. Maybe it was me. Maybe it wasn't. That was the point. He couldn't tell the difference between reality and fear anymore. Mark, on the other hand, was trying to hold himself together. He wore his expensive suits, smiled in meetings, shook hands like everything was fine. But behind closed doors, his world was caving in. His wife wasn't speaking to him. His mistress was demanding more than he could give. And worst of all, his clients had started to back away. Somehow, maybe through a leak, maybe through a rumor they had gotten wind of the footage they didn't want to be associated with. A man caught cheating on both his wife and his business partners. I hadn't even released the footage publicly. I didn't need to. A single spark of doubt in the right ears was enough to scorch his reputation. And Emily. Sweet, manipulative Emily. She tried to keep control, but paranoia works best on people who think they're in charge. She began checking her phone constantly, erasing her messages twice over, staring out the window at night as if someone was watching her. Because someone was. I made sure of it. It was simple. A single red rose left on her car one morning, tucked neatly under the windshield wiper. No card, no note, just the rose. The kind I used to bring her back when we were together. When she saw it, she froze. I was parked across the street, far enough not to be noticed, but close enough to watch her hands shake as she looked around, her face pale. She knew, or at least she suspected. But that's what made paranoia so powerful. She couldn't be sure. Maybe it was me. Maybe it was someone else. Maybe it was her own guilty conscience finally catching up to her. I wanted them to feel hunted, even in their own homes. To wonder if every phone call was tapped. Every shadow in the corner held eyes. Jason started locking his doors twice, 3 times. Mark changed his passwords weekly. Emily never drove straight home anymore. She circled blocks, checked mirrors, trying to shake off the phantom tail. They were chasing ghosts, and I was right there, pulling the strings, watching them stumble deeper into the fog. Because paranoia isn't just fear, it's isolation. It makes you turn on each other, push away the very people who might save you. And soon, that's exactly what they would do. Trust is fragile. It takes years to build, but only seconds to shatter. And the best part? You don't even have to break it yourself. You just need to make them wonder. Doubt will do the rest. Jason was already paranoid, stumbling through his days like a man with a noose around his neck. He was broke, drunk most of the time, and terrified that someone was out to get him. And when his so-called friends stopped picking up his calls, he turned to Mark. That was a mistake. I watched them meet at a quiet diner on the edge of town, the kind of place where secrets go to die. Jason leaned across the table, his hands shaking, whispering about the envelope, the recordings, the shadows he swore were following him. Mark listened, nodding slowly, but I saw the suspicion in his eyes. To him, Jason wasn't a victim. He was a liability, a weak link that could drag them all down. Mark told him, voice low but sharp. You brought this on yourself, Jason snapped. He slammed his fist on the table so hard the waitress jumped. You think this is me? You think I'd set myself up? His voice cracked, desperation spilling into every word. Mark stayed calm. That's when I knew the seed had been planted. He didn't believe Jason. He thought Jason was the one leaking information, maybe even blackmailing them and Emily. She only added gasoline to the fire. When Mark confronted her later, asking if she'd noticed anything strange, she turned it right back on him. You're the one sneaking around. How do I know it isn't you? The irony almost made me laugh. She was accusing him while hiding her own darkest secret. She thought she was clever, but in reality, she was tearing at the very threads that held them together. By the time I stepped into it my own touch, their alliance was already fractured. It didn't take much. Just one more push. I sent Jason an anonymous text from a burner phone. Mark sold you out. He's the reason your wife knows. Watch your back. Simple, direct, and deadly effective. That night, Jason showed up at Mark's house, pounding on the door, screaming accusations. Into the night, Mark didn't open, but the neighbors heard every word. The next morning, Mark's pristine image as the polished businessman with the perfect life was smeared with rumors of betrayal and scandal. Clients called less, friends avoided him, and Emily? She was caught in the middle, juggling lies she couldn't keep straight anymore. Jason suspected her too. One drunken evening, he confronted her outside the club, shouting that she'd been the one to set him up. She slapped him, and the crowd that had gathered cheered as if it was a show. Their alliance wasn't just breaking, it was imploding. All I had to do was sit back and watch as the cracks widened. Every accusation, every angry word, every shattered piece of trust pulled them closer to the edge. They were turning on each other exactly as I'd planned. And soon, when the time was right, I would give them the final push. Every game has an ending. Every lie, every betrayal, every scar, it all leads to one final moment when the truth crashes down. And after months of watching, planning, striking from the shadows, I was ready to end this. I had all the pieces I needed: the recordings of Jason's debts, the photos of Mark's infidelity, the evidence of Emily's secret dealings with her criminal lover. Each file, each photo, each shred of proof was like a loaded bullet waiting for the trigger. And tonight, I was going to pull it. I rented a small, dimly lit room in the back of an old bar. Neutral territory, the kind of place where no one asked questions as long as you paid cash. I sent each of them an invitation, anonymous, typed, no signature. Just a time, a date, and one line that guaranteed they couldn't resist: come alone, or the truth goes public. They showed up. Of course, they did. Fear has a way of pulling people in tighter than loyalty ever could. Jason was first, looking worn out, eyes bloodshot, his hands trembling. He scanned the room like a hunted man, paranoid to his core. Mark walked in next, his suit wrinkled, his face carrying the weight of sleepless nights. He looked at Jason with open disgust, as if blaming him for everything that had gone wrong. And then Emily. She entered, calm, almost too calm, her heels clicking against the floor, her eyes cold and calculating. She knew the walls were closing in, but still carried herself like a queen who refused to acknowledge her crumbling empire. They didn't notice me at first. I stayed in the shadows, watching them circle each other like cornered animals. Accusations flew. Jason shouted that Mark had betrayed him. Mark sneered that Jason was weak, dragging everyone down. Emily, for once, had no defense. She just stood there, silent, listening as the men tore into each other. That's when I stepped forward. Enough. The word cut through the noise like a blade. They froze, their eyes locking on me. And for the first time in months, they saw the face of the ghost that had been haunting them. Jason's jaw dropped. Mark's face twisted with shock and fear. Emily. She didn't flinch. She just stared at me, her eyes filled with something between hatred and recognition. You, she whispered. Me, I said. The man you thought you could destroy. The man you betrayed, lied to, cheated on. The man you buried alive. But I crawled out, and now, it's your turn to feel the dirt closing in. I dropped the briefcase on the table with a heavy thud. The latch clicked, and the files spilled out. Photos, recordings, contracts, every ugly truth laid bare. Jason reached for one of the recordings, his face pale as his own voice echoed through the room, pleading, begging loan sharks for mercy. Mark flipped through the photos of himself with his mistress, his hands shaking as if the images themselves burned. And Emily. Emily picked up the photo of her lover's drug deal, her lips tightening into a thin, bitter line. This is blackmail, Mark stammered. No, I said, stepping closer. This is justice. They started arguing again, louder, sharper, this time with no pretense. Jason accused Mark of setting him up. Mark accused Emily of orchestrating everything. Emily laughed coldly, saying they were both fools, too blind to see what was coming. And I just stood there, letting the chaos consume them. Because that was the final act of my revenge, not killing them with my own hands, but letting them destroy each other. By the time the night was over, their alliance was dead. Jason stormed out, swearing vengeance on Mark. Mark left shortly after, his reputation ruined beyond repair. And Emily, she lingered, her eyes meeting mine one last time. You think you've won, she said softly, but revenge doesn't heal. It rots. One day, it'll rot you too. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I'd already won. As I watched her walk away, the weight I'd carried for so long finally lifted. The trap had closed. The game was over, and for the first time in years, I could breathe.